The second Daryl's keys were rattling in the lock, Katie was off the couch and racing to the front door. "Did you do it? Did you do it?" She was practically bouncing up and down with giddy anticipation and unwilling to give him a second to even breathe. "Did you kill her? Is it done?" Daryl couldn't help but to smile and shake his head. She was such a bad influence on him. He tried to remember the first time they had met, but for some reason was unable to. It just kind of seemed like she had always been there. Tim and Jerry had been his roommates for close to 8 years, and somewhere along the way, she just kind of fell in with the two brothers. Before Daryl knew what happened, she was living in the little 2-bedroom house as well. Remembering when the guys moved in was a little easier. He had liked them both immensely the first time they had met, and he fell hard for their sob story of growing up as orphans, with no real family other than each other. That wasn't the real reason he extended the invitation, however. The truth was, they were fun. Age-wise, they were technically adults, but their maturity level in no way reflected that. Neither of them bothered growing up, and there was really no telling what they might be getting into at any point in time. Plus, they really liked to play up the identical twin aspect and enjoyed going with the same look as each other every day. Daryl could tell them apart. At the moment, Tim's hair was just a bit shorter than Jerry's, but most people didn't have a clue. Tim had told them once, quite some time ago, the story of how they'd met Katie in the area, but Daryl really didn't retain it. Tim had verbal diarrhea and a different story or 10 every day. It would have been impossible to try and keep them all in the memory banks. Tim's condition was aided considerably by the fact that he always had a bag of green herbs nearby. Jerry wasn't quite the stoner his brother was, but he did partake from time to time. Daryl hadn't complained when Katie started hanging around. There was something about her that he found truly compelling. It wasn't that he had the hots for her or anything like that. She was not at all his type, but she was sweet and funny and an absolute dynamo of high, contagious, positive energy. He loved the way she kept them all in line and yet on their toes at the same time. For all these reasons, and others he didn't fully understand, she could talk him into practically anything. She had an innate ability to persuade him into activities that most people would consider irrational, and in a way of making sense out of it in the process. That's the way it was with Julie, his soon-to-be deceased ex-girlfriend, and Marcus, his recently deceased ex-best friend. As crushing a blow as discovering their secret liaison was, Daryl was originally going to just break off both relationships and count his blessings that he discovered the infidelity when he did, and not further down the road when she might have been his wife and he might have been his best man. It had been Katie who finally got him to see the reasoning behind ending their lives. They were, after all, bad people. Who knows who else they could have ended up hurting in the long run? It was the same thing with Yuri Melosh, the Ukrainian guy who used to live down the street that swindled Daryl out of nearly $3,000 in his Ponzi scheme. How many little old ladies would he have cleaned out before someone finally stopped him? Then there was Pritchett Ricketts, the prick who kept pinching his clients by undercutting his offers. Daryl was one of the best small job carpenters in the area, but somehow that damn Ricketts was always on his tail. It was Katie that pointed out that the unscrupulous man must have been following Darryl. It also stood to her reasoning that there was no possible way of just cutting the leech out of his life. Other than killing him, of course. Father Michener was the only one Darryl tried putting up a significant argument against. And even now, it weighed on his conscience. Father Andrew Michener had been the pastor at the local Catholic church for nearly 40 years before he passed on. Darryl's grandmother, who left the little house to him when she died, attended service there twice a week, every week, until she died, and the priest had grown fondly attached to the longtime widow. When Darryl moved in 9 years ago, Father Michener had made it a point to visit the home and check in on Doris's grandson. And Darryl quite liked the pleasant man. Not enough to attend his church, but he did like him. It was Tim and Jerry who initially didn't care for him. The first time they met, the father made a lighthearted joke about them being freeloaders who didn't pay rent, and despite the lack of malicious intent, the guys, who never took offense at anything, had their feelings hurt. That was really no big deal, but the priest continued to make weekly recruiting visits, and eventually, Katie was the one to see the demons in him. Absolutely terrified the first time she saw the man and the creatures possessing him from within. She later explained that the gift was called discernment, and that she had always been able to see unclean spirits. Darryl fought her for some time on the issue, but her fear was real, and Katie never lied to him, or anyone for that matter. She was truthful to a brutal fault, and in the end, he believed her. He believed in a world beyond the one he could see. He believed that Katie had gifts that he didn't. And above all, he believed her when she said they would be plagued by demonic attacks if the poor man wasn't put out of his misery. It was, by her estimation, a mercy killing. Darryl was hoping that the moment of bestowed mercy would be the last time he would have to deal with such unpleasant things, but here he was again. "So," she pressed, "are you going to answer me or what?" Darryl chuckled again and pushed past her to the living room. "Are you going to give me a chance to actually answer?" Katie feigned offense behind him and said, "Well, excuse me, by all means." Tim and Jerry were wrestling with each other on the couch like a couple of teenage boys, and didn't bring it to an end until Darryl plopped down on the couch next to them, diverting their attention. "Well," Jerry asked what they were all thinking. "He hasn't said." Katie had positioned herself on the lazy boy across from him. "For some reason, he's trying to play it cool, which," she paused for effect, "is not cool." The brothers began to fall all over each other with raucous laughter, which brought Darryl's attention to the empty baggie and green herbs strung about the coffee table. They were high as kites. Sometimes living with these two was like being in a frat house or having children, maybe. He definitely didn't take them as seriously as he did his female roommate. "Well," Darryl finally spoke, "not that you two yahoos will remember later." He was looking at the twins and they fell into another round of side-splitting. "But yeah, I did it. I cut her brake line. Katie's jaw dropped. You cut her brake line? She repeated. Daryl proudly nodded yes, but the pride only lasted a moment before Katie made her displeasure known. What the hell, Daryl? That's not what we talked about. You were supposed to poison her or stab her? Where the hell did you come up with cutting the brake line? She sighed, exasperated. How do you even know which one is the brake line? YouTube, Daryl replied sheepishly. I looked it up. The brothers couldn't stop laughing. Jerry actually falling onto the floor and holding his sides. Katie didn't find it funny at all. You looked up a video on how to cut a brake line, and then you went and cut someone's brake line? Please tell me at least you used a guest account on some computer somewhere else. She seemed like she couldn't even believe she was having to ask, and it was the complete opposite of the reaction he had been expecting, especially when he could only mumble, I used my phone. Katie jumped across the couch and slapped him in the face, drawing blood with her nails. You fucking idiot, she yelled in his face. You've screwed us all. Tim joined his brother rolling on the floor as neither seemed to grasp why Katie was so upset. What are we supposed to do when you get arrested? Daryl was genuinely shocked. Why would he be arrested? I don't understand, was all he could say. And Katie shook her head with sick pity, but was not given an opportunity to explain. The next few seconds passed in a blur. Broken glass filled the room from the windows, and chunks of wood flew in from the hall where the front door had been smashed from its hinges. Suddenly, the room was full of men in black armor from head to tail, flashing lights and screaming. Violently thrown to the floor and handcuffed, Daryl couldn't see what condition his roommates were in. Much like him, they were probably overwhelmed by the sudden flurry of activity. Jerked to his feet and hustled down the hall, he knew he would probably be in some degree of trouble, but he was truly hoping that his friends wouldn't be charged with anything. He didn't see them being cuffed, and his name was the only one they stated as being under arrest and Mirandized. So, hopefully, they could be left out of whatever mess this turned into. As he was being pulled out the front door, Daryl called out over his shoulder, desperately hoping they could hear him. Don't say anything, guys. Don't say a word. By that point, it was the best he could do. An hour later, he was behind bars, barring the death penalty, for the rest of his life. Toya Peterson couldn't help but to curse when the call came in at 1:45 in the morning. Raising two girls as a single mom, combined with a job that could call at any moment, as the current call proved, sleep was proving more and more elusive. The moment the ringtone woke her from deep sleep, she knew she was done for the night. She didn't even have to answer it. It did, however, turn out to be a rather interesting call, though. The department had arrested a rather notorious serial killer. Not that it wasn't good news. One less sicko on the street was good for everybody, but that wasn't the part that was particularly interesting to her. It was his pets. Normally, the rare personality that fell into his range didn't keep pets. Not living ones, anyway. But this man had 3 cats, which were currently in the kennel at headquarters. Were it not such a high-profile case, the animals would have most likely been turned over to animal control or the Humane Society. But given the uniqueness of the situation, they had thought to call her. Toya's official title was that of a detective profiler, but everyone knew that her true passion was her feline rescue group. No one had a problem turning Katie, Tim, and Jerry over to her, and rather than putting them through further trauma, she decided to keep them in the end. They won her over rather quickly with their infectious personalities, and her girls fell in love immediately as well. The youngest, Sarah, even claims they speak to her. It's adorable.
Hello everyone, and thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please leave a like and let others know where to find us. There's also a link to other works by the author in the description if you'd like to check them out. If you have any story suggestions, please leave them in the comments below or send us an email in the description. If you don't know what to comment, write, "There is only an echo," and I hope to see you in the next one.